Good Thursday morning and happy game day, or should I say rain day, looking at the forecast for tonight. But welcome to episode number 2 of Commentator's Corner. Tyler Reedy and Brendan Preisman here with you once again. And Brendan, hopefully we got a game ready to go tonight for the Junior Jays against
Hopefully.
Papillion La Vista.
Broadcast is still up in the air for tonight, obviously, especially considering how bad the storm might be. But even if we don't get to watch that game or broadcast that game, there will still be plenty of football broadcasted this weekend because college football is back, baby.
Oh yeah, things are heating up this week, and then the NFL begins a week from today as well with that Thursday night game between Tampa Bay and Dallas. But our first subject for today's show is the Junior Jays game today against Papillion La Vista, and should be a pretty good one. Junior Jays lost to West Side last week, 23-8, and they were pretty sloppy for the most part on offense, aside from their run game. Shamar Brown looked pretty good at times, rushing for 61 yards and a touchdown on 21 carries, but not much of a pass game for Prep. Jack Pernicke was mostly inaccurate, and special teams was an issue as well, as Prep went 0 for 1 on extra points, 0 for 1 on field goals, but they're in a fairly similar situation as they were last year. They've got plenty of things to clean up, especially on offense. They're going into a game against a non-top 10 Monarchs team, but a Monarchs team that played well week 1. So we'll see how things play out. Papillion La Vista was able to beat their rivals, Papillion La Vista South, 28-26 after going down 20-0 in the first half last week. So should be an interesting game, assuming it happens.
It should be. I think the key is honestly going to be the weather because you look at Papillion La Vista's stats from that game. Their senior quarterback, Nick Chanez, went 16-22 for 241 yards and 4 touchdowns to 4 different receivers. So he can throw the ball really well, but if it rains as hard as it's expected to tonight, there's almost no way he's going to be able to have that same success throwing the ball. And meanwhile, for Prep, the rain might end up helping them because then they won't really have to worry about a passing offense, and they can go back to that power game that was working so well last week against Westside because they lined up in a 2-receiver, 2-back set quite a bit in that first half, and it was working very well for them for some time. So if they can go back to that for this game and do it without having to worry about setting up their passing game, they could have a very good game tonight, assuming it happens.
Yeah, I think there's a very good chance this could end up being a power versus power type of game because the Monarchs actually were able to run the ball pretty well last week. Peyton Prestito did just about everything you can. He's Papillion La Vista's top running back, plays defense as well. He was one of their leading tacklers, but on offense, 21 carries, 91 yards for Prestito, also caught a long receiving touchdown, had 2 catches, 49 yards, and that receiving touchdown. The Monarchs also got run over pretty well by Devin Jones, running back for Papillion La Vista South. He had 138 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns, so Shamar Brown could be in for a big game, but definitely expecting a fairly low-scoring game, especially with the kind of defense we saw from Prep last week.
Yeah, the key for the Monarchs might be their offensive line and their turnovers because they lost 3 fumbles in that game, and that was a game that had fairly good conditions. Imagine what's going to happen if they end up playing in the monsoon-like conditions tonight. And then they also allowed 7 tackles for loss, and that is not something you want to do against a defensive line like Preps, which, as we saw last week, is really, really good at getting pressure on the quarterback.
Yeah, they got in the backfield well. Also, limiting Dom Rizak fairly well toward the line of scrimmage. Once he got into open space, it was a little bit more of a struggle, but Junior Jays were able to penetrate the backfield quite nicely, I would say, last week. And this is a big game for Prep going into next week because next Friday night, September 10th, top-ranked team in the state, Bellevue West, is looming. So I think if the Junior Jays want any chance to hang with the big dog, they've got to play a strong game tonight and generate some momentum, especially on offense.
Yeah, going into Bellevue West, number 1 team, they feel as though they should be defending back-to-back state crowns, and they are not because they got upset by Kearney last year in the state semifinals. That is a motivated team. That is a talented team. They had 2 guys make the Omaha World Herald Super 6 in the preseason preview, which is absolute insanity, especially considering that the Super 6 covers all classes of football in Nebraska. But right now, with what we've seen from this offense, there is a path to beating Bellevue West, but it is a path that so far this team does not appear it's able to take. we'll see what they can do against Papillion La Vista. That'll really show how close the game against Bell West will be, especially since that's an away game. It's just going to be really tough for the offense. They're going to have to figure out a system that works because you can't afford to do that against Bell West.
Yeah, Junior J is definitely going to have to try to go from 0 to 100 pretty darn quick this week against Papillion La Vista. So the game is at 7 p.m. At least that's what it's currently scheduled for as of this morning. 7 p.m. tonight at Burke Stadium. The Birdcage theme is blackout. There will be Chick-fil-A offered to the first 300 prep students, so should be a fun night. Hopefully not too wet, but the forecast, as we've been talking about, has not been promising. So 7 p.m. tonight, if you can't be there, we are still planning as of now to broadcast the game, but things could certainly change. We should know by the end of the school day whether or not we'll be able to broadcast, and maybe we'll know if the game is moved as well. So we'll definitely keep you posted. Keep it on CP Sports Network on Twitter for all the updates. So with that, we'll move things along to college football. As you hinted at earlier, it is back tonight, baby. So tonight, 4th-ranked Ohio State is visiting Minnesota. So,
row that boat.
Yeah.
Row that boat, baby.
So if the prep game does not end up falling through, you get to stay home and watch that. Big matchup in the Big Ten. Ohio State trying to start their season strong and make another push toward the playoff. And Thursday night tonight through Monday night, you've got at least one, pretty big Power 5 game every single day. Tonight it's Ohio State, Minnesota. Tomorrow night, you got a good matchup in the ACC with 10th-ranked North Carolina visiting Virginia Tech. And then Saturday is the big day, as usual.
Oh, man.
Saturday is the big day. Penn State goes to Wisconsin. That's a 19 versus 12 matchup in the Big Ten. Alabama plays Miami. That's Miami, Florida. At Mercedes-Benz Stadium in Atlanta, that's a 1 versus 14 matchup. And then Indiana and Iowa, 17 versus 18. Big game in the Big Ten as well. And then Louisiana Lafayette against Texas. Your team,
Horns,
Brendan.
baby.
Yep. That's a 23 versus 21 matchup. And then Georgia and Clemson, a 5 versus 3. So Saturday is absolutely loaded.
Mm-hmm. And then that's not even mentioning Sunday night. That's right. We've got a Sunday night college football game, folks. And that is your Fighting Irish traveling down to Tallahassee to take on the Florida State Seminoles. That, from what I'm hearing, that could be a pretty big litmus test into how this season is expected to go for the Irish. Will it be another playoff push or just staying in contention for a New Year's Six Bowl? I guess we'll find out where they want their season to go tomorrow or Sunday.
Yeah, Florida State's definitely not the same team that the Irish saw in 2018, the Irish saw last year in 2020. This is a much better looking team, and as indicated by Notre Dame only being, I think, 8.5, 7.5 point favorites. Yep. So definitely could be interesting. Underrated early test for the Irish, as you said, to show where this season's going to go. And Notre Dame can't really miss an opportunity to win a game that they're favorites in, because they don't really have a big game to prove themselves like they did last year with Clemson coming to South Bend. Their biggest game is Cincinnati, who, for all we know, could fall out of the top 10, and then maybe North Carolina.
Cincinnati, you mentioned that Cincinnati game. That's a prove-it game for Cincinnati rather than Notre Dame, because that's Cincinnati. They want to be able to turn to that and say, look at this. We beat Notre Dame. We beat one of, the powerhouses of college football. And assuming they win all the rest of their games, which I believe they're favored to, I think the College Football Playoff Committee has to look at that and say, we might as well. Especially if you look at, we know probably Clemson's getting in. Mm-hmm. We know the SEC champ is getting in. And the Big Ten champ is probably getting in. But then you look at the team that's going to be the Big 12 or the Pac-12 champ, because those are probably the teams that are going to have a shot at it, and you're like, is 11-1 with a similar schedule really better than 12-0 in a slightly weaker conference? But that's going to be tough. I personally think the game of the week is going to involve my Longhorns, which isn't as fun as you might think for me, because it's Louisiana Lafayette. It's the opening game of Steve Sarkisian's career as head coach at the university. He's hoping to do what Tom Herman couldn't really do, and that's lead Texas to either consistently beat Oklahoma or at the very least win some Big 12 titles, one of those two, even though we're probably not going to be worrying about the Big 12 titles for much longer. That's a story for another time. But Louisiana Lafayette, a really good team, opening up the season ranked 23rd in the AP poll. They are, aside from Coastal Carolina, the best group of 5 team. and they could probably make a push for a New Year's Six Bowl if they're able to upset Texas and turn that into some momentum in their season. I hope they don't. It's going to be the first game for Hudson Card. He was named the starter for Texas earlier this week. But I'm definitely going to be watching it. I just hope it turns out well.
Yeah, just to wrap up Week 1, Monday night, Louisville plays Ole Miss. So, yeah, going back to Louisiana Lafayette and Texas, I don't know if it's the best game of the week. It's definitely the most underrated, in my opinion.
Oh, for sure.
Because, anytime you got a Texas versus Louisiana team, that's always fun. We saw how fun the Texas-LSU game was.
We almost beat them. We were the closest team to beating them this year. Anyone who says that LSU couldn't have lost to anyone is a liar. We were close. We were so close, and now you're making me angry.
Well, we'll see if Texas can get it done against a different Louisiana team on Saturday. But
it's a home game. That's helpful.
Yeah, it does help. But Clemson and Georgia, that's the big one. 3 versus 5. Clemson brings back DJ Uiagalelei, who saw some big game action last year with Trevor Lawrence out when he had COVID-19. Justin Ross, what a great story he has. Had that amazing freshman year in Clemson's 2018 national championship run. He'll be coming back for Clemson as well. Meanwhile, Georgia brings in JT Daniels as quarterback to replace Jake Fromm, and I'm hearing that he might be the best quarterback that Kirby Smart has had. Really brings a nice downfield passing asset to this Georgia offense. So should be an interesting game. Georgia-Clemson. One thing we definitely can't deny is there's going to be playoff level intensity coming out of that one.
There definitely will. The winner of this game, assuming that they can make it through the rest of their season unscathed or with just one loss, will make the playoff, I think. Because 11-1 with a win over Georgia or a win over Clemson, that's a resume that the College Football Playoff Committee cannot not take a second look at. Although I'm personally lower on Georgia than a lot of people are. Clemson's only favored by 3 points. I think that's a little low. I think they're going to be able to cover that spread. Because you look at Georgia, you said best quarterback Kirby Smart's ever had. Kirby Smart does not have a great track record with quarterbacks, though. He ran Justin Fields out of town. He actually didn't start JT Daniels to start off last year. He started a guy named Stetson Bennett. Great name, not a great quarterback. Had to switch to Daniels mid-season. But with Georgia's track record in big games under Kirby Smart, Alabama game in the college football playoff title a couple years ago comes to mind. I don't know that they're really ready for this big stage, especially on opening night. If this was more of their 4th game on the schedule or something like that, where they've had time to figure out what works and what doesn't. But you're going in blind against a team that, except for Alabama, has been the most successful of this decade, and I just don't know that the Bulldogs are ready for that.
Yeah, Clemson, been there, done that, national champions in 2016 and 2018, so big matchup to start the season, but definitely, as you said, the loser of this game, if they win out, could easily make the playoffs, or winner of this game, if they happen to lose a game somewhere down the line the rest of the year. Obviously, Georgia and the SEC is going to have a tough schedule, so they could easily lose one in October or November, but 11-1 could certainly get into the playoff with that game. So, college football this weekend. Hope you're as ready for it as we are. We are pumped.
Oh, yeah.
Going to be a fun few days here, and we'll turn things over now to Major League Baseball, which had some interesting storylines, especially Sunday with the New York Mets. Boy, they had a lot of storylines over the last few seasons.
Interesting.
Yeah, so
Mets fans and hating the team they're supposed to be fans of. Name a better duo.
Yeah, so what happened with the Mets is they've underperformed this season. We know that. They went out this past offseason, traded for Francisco Lindor, one of the best shortstops in the game, and he was hitting around 200 for basically most of the season, had a couple hot stretches, but he's been booed. The Mets have been booed. They've dropped substantially out of the National League East race, just giving it up to the Braves and the Phillies over the last month or so since the trade deadline. And at that trade deadline, it's not like they sat there and did nothing. They went out and got Javier Baez, one of the best middle infielders in the game, and Francisco Lindor's best friend, to join him in that middle infield. And Baez has been okay. I'd say he's probably been a little bit underperforming, but
and they've booed him.
Yep, the Mets have been booed, and as they probably should. There were high expectations coming into this year, and the Mets certainly have not met them. But Javi Baez and company, Francisco Lindor got in on the act, Kevin Pillar got in on the act. They decided that when they got hits, when they hit home runs in Sunday's win over the Nationals, that they were going to give thumbs down. And
Yep.
the Yankees did that a few years ago, but the difference this year is that the Mets are doing it to the fans. Javi Baez specifically said that, if the fans are going to boo us when we're not successful, we're going to boo them when we are successful.
That is one of the most nonsensical things I've ever heard come out of a baseball player's mouth, but it is. I just think it's really interesting how some people are willing to pay money to go to a game just to boo the team that they're going to see. Like, I understand the rationale behind booing, especially when you've got a team that's as talented on paper as this Mets team is, but to me, booing your home team just doesn't make sense. It feels a little disloyal to me. I can understand it if they're, like, historically bad, but the Mets aren't historically bad. They're still underperforming, and you mentioned they're not in the division race necessarily, but there's still plenty of hope for a wild card spot potentially. And who knows, that hope might have been sparked by what happened, I think it was yesterday actually. They had a game against the Braves, it was, I believe, down 5 runs heading into the 9th inning. And then they ended up winning the game, and guess who scored the winning run?
Baez.
Javier Baez scored the winning run. It was Gary Cohen on the call for the Mets and shouted, "Turn those thumbs around," as Baez came into home plate. Maybe that's the spark the Mets need the rest of this year. Who knows?
Yeah, and another interesting aspect to that, thumbs down story was Sunday night after Baez had made his comments about booing the fans. Mets president Sandy Alderson said that's not going to be tolerated. That is completely unacceptable to do that kind of thing to the fans. And I get that, but, honestly for me, when you've got a team like the Mets that has underperformed as much as they have this season, if there's, anything that could potentially kind of unite that clubhouse and get them going and kind of energize them, especially on offense, I mean, you got to let them try to run with it, I think.
Mm-hmm.
But I can see where Sandy Alderson's coming from, but definitely an interesting story with the Mets.
All sides are coming from, yeah. And the rest of baseball is pretty interesting, too. The Dodgers just swept the Braves, who, as you mentioned, are in the thick of things for the NL East. And they took the lead in the NL West. They took that from the San Francisco Giants, despite the Giants going 19-9 in the past month. They have somehow given up 5 games in the standings to the Dodgers. That's how red hot the Dodgers are right now. They are on a tear. That NL West race is certainly going to be something. And then the Yankees, another team that really got back into the mix when people didn't think they were going to be able to. Garrett Cole last night, 14 strikeouts, including 3 of Shohei Ohtani. Baseball is fun to follow from a distance.
Yeah, and over the past weekend as well, the Crosstown Series, the Chicago Cubs, Chicago White Sox took place, and it was wild. Friday night, the White Sox won it 17-13, football score over the Cubs. And Saturday night with Lance Lynn, probably the American League Cy Young favorite pitching, Cubs put up 7 runs on him to win the game 7-0, and then the White Sox turned it around and won 13-1 on Sunday afternoon. So definitely an interesting series there, a series that everybody really expected the White Sox to kind of blow out, and they did on Sunday. But Cubs kept it close first 2 games, and look at some of the biggest series coming up this weekend. You mentioned the Dodgers, you mentioned the Giants. Well, guess what? They're playing 3 games Friday through Sunday in San Francisco, and if the Giants can win today at 2:45 versus the Brewers, it's going to be a matchup of the 2 best records in baseball, and the 2 teams are going to be tied atop the National League West. Big series. And then the Oakland Athletics, Toronto Blue Jays, 2 teams trying to stay alive in that American League wild card race. A's are 2.5 games back of the Red Sox. Blue Jays are 4.5 games back of the Red Sox. And then the Astros visit the San Diego Padres for 3 games as well. Padres are battling the Cincinnati Reds, Philadelphia Phillies for that second NL wildcard spot. And then Fernando Tatis Jr., last time the Padres took on Houston, he had 2 home runs and 6 RBI in a 3-game series at the end of May, and had some clutch home runs as well. So definitely some big series coming up. So, if there's any breaks in the college football schedule, tune in for some baseball because the playoff races are heating up.
And now we get to transition to a new segment, which I believe you got the name from one of my most famous award-winning calls from last year's comeback against Millard West. I'll try and do it again, but be warned, it is 8:43 a.m. right now, and I am very tired. Here we go. What is happening?
Pretty good.
Oh, yeah, that wasn't bad. Anyway, what is happening this week concerns a high school that might not actually be a high school, who many of you have probably heard of, Bishop Sycamore High School. Now, this story started last Sunday when IMG Academy played in the Hall of Fame High School Football Classic in Canton, Ohio. They played a team from Ohio called Bishop Sycamore and beat them 58-0. At first, it didn't seem all that surprising. After all, IMG Academy is the defending national champions in high school football and were ranked number 1 in the country heading into that game. But still, ESPN's announcers did notice something odd. They were told by Bishop Sycamore that there were a number of D1 prospects on the roster. They could not verify that. There was a player injured during the game who was not on the roster given to ESPN. And the commentators were at one point going in on the team saying, like, they should stop this game before someone gets hurt. This looks dangerous for Bishop Sycamore. So that was bad enough. And then some more stuff started coming out about Bishop Sycamore, and I'll let you handle that.
Yeah, so just to touch up on that roster part, the roster given to the broadcasters only had names. It did not have numbers. It did not have heights, weights, class, and didn't have class probably because Bishop Sycamore's team was made up of fifth-year seniors and JUCO dropouts, and apparently there's supposed to be some kind of religion-based school that's supposed to give kids opportunities through football. So that was interesting. But the other two key parts of this were that Bishop Sycamore's coach had an active arrest warrant going, and Bishop Sycamore had played on Friday night, so less than 48 hours between games. I don't think that's very safe.
It is definitely not, especially when you consider that based on just like the video of the Bishop Sycamore sidelines, they probably didn't have more than about 40 guys for either game. And the coaches did claim, we had different rosters for both of those games. But that doesn't seem likely, especially given that some of the names and numbers remain the same. Oh, and by the way, their coach isn't the only person affiliated with this team with an active arrest warrant. And from what people are discovering now, this school, and I do put air quotes around that, their address is either a P.O. box or a residential home listed on their website. Their website was basically like a blog on how to make a good recruiting tape, I believe. But this school doesn't appear to exist, and in the recent days, a lot of stories have come out from former players and even some current players about the time that a coach made some of them beat up a homeless person, or times when they had to steal food from grocery stores because they weren't able to eat, or a time when they stayed in a hotel for 5 months and then had to leave the hotel because the checks that their coaches were using to pay for their hotel stay bounced. So I feel like we're just kind of at the tip of the iceberg here with Bishop Sycamore. This is clearly something very, very, very bad is going on, and we're continuing to find out more. And every time you do, it just kind of makes you sit and stare. How does that work? And as if this wasn't bad enough, this is not the first time that some people affiliated with Bishop Sycamore have tried to make a fake high school football team. They've done this before. It did not work. And now they're trying again.
Wow. What is happening indeed? So we'll continue with that segment. That'll be something that we do at the end of each show, where we highlight something very strange that happened in the big wild world of sports over the past week. But that's about it for episode number 2 of Commentator's Corner. And tune into the game tonight. Creighton Prep taking on Papillion La Vista at 7 p.m. at Burke Stadium. That'll be on the Creighton Prep TV YouTube channel.
Hopefully.
Assuming it happens. Yeah, we got to try to pray to the rain gods that they allow for this football game to take place at Burke Stadium tonight. But Brendan and I will be on the call if it does happen. And Brendan, any last notes before we wrap it up here?
Well, yeah, tune in. Make sure you watch a lot of football over the weekend. Everybody stay safe, stay dry, especially if you're in the Northeast right now dealing with the remnants of Hurricane Ida. Yeah. Stay dry here in Nebraska because there's going to be some flash flood warnings going into today and tomorrow. And just have a good, safe weekend.
Yeah, we'll see you next week. Next week we'll be previewing the NFL because
Let's go.
We'll be filming next Thursday. The NFL season will be underway next Thursday.
You want fantasy picks? We've got fantasy picks.
So, we'll be talking NFL. We'll be talking prep football, obviously, college football, MLB as well. We'll have it all for you next week. So keep it right here. Have a great week, everybody. See you next time.